Welcome, everyone. I see some folks on the screen. Thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a very exciting conversation about what I think is one of the most exciting industries in the world. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here in the room, and I'll go around the room and introduce everyone in just a few minutes. But first, I just want to say thank you to the people in industry who are joining us today for this conversation. You have made America the #1 producer of oil and gas in the entire world. And we all know what that means to our economic security here in the United States. We also know what it means to our energy security, but we also want to impress upon what it means for our national security as well. We talk about this industry quite often in terms of number of jobs created, and that's absolutely true. You are hiring Americans all across the country and, in fact, all across the world. But you are also providing this president and any future president who chooses to wrap their arms around this important industry with foreign policy options that many presidents have not had in the last 4 to 5 decades. It's been quite a while. So I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for making America the #1 producer in the entire world. And today's discussion is going to talk about the state of the industry, and we all know it's been a difficult period during this pandemic. But we're going to talk about the future of this industry and what we feel will be a very bright economic recovery just around the corner. So with that, I'm going to go around the room and introduce some of the folks that are here with me. Starting to my far left, Sherman Knight, who is the president of Competitive Power Ventures. Mike Summers, who is the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, API, here in town. I'm going to skip over the important gentleman to my right and move over to the Deputy Secretary of Energy, the Honorable Katie McGregor, a very good friend. And also next to Katie is the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Fossil Energy, Steve Winberg. And then joining us, very importantly, many regional players who are joining us virtually. Jeff Ventura, the CEO of Range Resources, Karen Harbert, who is the CEO of the American Gas Association, Charlie Joyce, Chairman of Otis Eastern Services, Kathleen, you got a name that looks like mine. Very hard to pronounce. Would you say it?
Kathleen Scava.
Oh, great. That's not as hard as it looks.
No, it's
President
not.
of the Western Energy Alliance. Nate Duckett, who is the mayor of Farmington, New Mexico. Richard Weber, who is the chairman and CEO of Penn Energy. Welcome all. Thank you for taking time to join us today. I would now like to introduce a very, very important player in the Trump administration and the guy who has led our economic recovery on behalf of the president for the last 3.5 years. He's become a very dear friend of mine. I am not embarrassed to say I've been a longtime fan of his. I used to watch the Kudlow and Kramer show to learn the little bit I still know about economics. Larry Kudlow began his career very early as a professional economist with the Federal Reserve. He's also worked at Bear Stearns. And you probably know him best from his economic journalism over the course of the last perhaps 2 decades on CNBC. He's a dear friend. He is a valued advisor to the president. And Larry will lead this conversation and moderate the discussion from here. Larry, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. There we go. Yes, thank you for inviting me. Honored. And no better cabinet officer than Dan Briette. None. Zero. So very pleased to help out. Let me just make a few brief points before we dive into our conversation. As the Secretary said, President Trump has put a premium on energy and energy dominance or energy independence, however you want to call it, and he will continue to do so. I don't want to politicize this. I just want to say that the other team, if you will, has some bizarre plans that would do great harm to energy, to the economy, to jobs, and so forth. And POTUS will continue, if he's given the opportunity for a second term, to pursue the low-tax deregulatory policies that have made us the world's #1 producer. So it's a key point for us. And of course, in terms of an economy, the macro economy, it's awfully nice to have relatively inexpensive and very plentiful energy, literally powering the economy. And since we are a strong pro-growth, prosperity-oriented administration, that too will continue. In brief, in terms of where we are now, having gone through this brutal pandemic and the economic contraction in the first half of the year, fortunately, I think we had a good underpinning going into this. You may have seen the Census Bureau reports, historic increases in household family income in 2019, but also, the president's first 3 years in office with lower taxes and deregulation and fair and reciprocal trade, as well as energy. Second, I thought the rescue package last winter was good. As you may know, I'm kind of an old Reagan supply sider. Spending is not my favorite, but sometimes the government has to do what it needs to do in an emergency situation and use all the levers of power, and that's what we've tried to do. And thirdly, the numbers coming in so far are really quite good. I dare say they're better than a lot of people expected, maybe even including myself. I'm usually the optimist, but jobs numbers have done very well. 10.5 million jobs, 14 million if you use the household survey, big drop in unemployment to 8.4% in August. A lot of folks didn't think we'd get single digits until early next year. And if you go through the different sectors, we're really seeing sort of boom-like conditions, V recovery conditions, whether it's housing or retailing or manufacturing or autos, tremendous increases. So we're snapping back. We hope and pray that the virus remains under control. It's not over. I understand that. We got through the summer snap-ups and hot flashes and hot spots without doing too much harm to the economy. So that was a good thing. And we will see what we get this fall. But I'm pretty optimistic we're going to grow at least 20% in the third and fourth quarters. And I notice even the usually dour Federal Reserve has growth next year at, I think, something like 5%. A lot of Wall Street economists think it'll be stronger than that. There's some Wall Street economists who are old pals of mine who think the economy is going to grow at 35% in the third quarter. So we will see. But I'm just setting the table. I know you stand ready to meet all demands from everywhere. I myself have become a tremendous proponent of LNG in negotiations with Europe. I'm an unpaid, uncommissioned LNG salesperson, and it's okay. And I think somewhere out there is my pal Jeff Martin, who taught me all about LNG and infrastructure and being competitive around the world in Europe and Asia. And so I'm all for it. And not too long ago in 2008, I was the guy on TV who started the show every night for a couple of months, drill, drill, drill. So I think you understand my sympathies or biases. And also, I don't know, my deputy is here, Francis Brook, who's the brains behind the operation. And NEC has been blessed to have a very strong environment and energy sector. And we work with Secretary Brouillette literally on a daily basis. So enough from me. And we want to start the questions. Secretary, how do we do this?
Sure, Larry, if you would just begin the conversation, I'd like to ask many of the panelists some questions. I think there's activity happening all across the United States that I think will give us some guidance as we think about policy moving into the remainder of this year, perhaps all throughout 21. So if we would open it up to questions to the audience, I'd love to engage them in conversation.
Okay. Let me start with Mike, who's here in Washington, Mike Summers. What are you hearing? Let's give us a real quick overview. So the pandemic's been brutal and no sector worse hurt than energy, no question. At one point, no one would take delivery and we had negative prices, crazy stuff. So now it's back to something around 40, close to 40. And I noticed the spread between Brent and West Texas has almost disappeared. So in your judgment, what you hear from your members and so forth, how do you dig out of this? You read doom and gloom in the papers, but I always dismiss all that stuff. Energy business has always been a cyclical business, a lot of tough, hardy people. And of course, the fracking world is still, I think, at the cutting edge, and POTUS is going to protect that. So why don't you just give us a quick overview, and then we'll get down to specifics.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kudlow. Thank you, Secretary Brouillette. It's great to be with you again. We spent some time together in Denver recently with some key business leaders and labor leaders in the state of Colorado about the importance of this industry in building back, because we know that really the foundation of the economic recovery that we expect is going to be energy. This industry historically has provided inexpensive energy for the American people. In fact, if you look at what has happened over the course of the last 10 years, you've seen household costs go up significantly in other parts of the economy. So housing costs have gone up 2/3, education costs have gone up 2/3, even food costs have gone up 1/3 just in the last 10 years. But household energy costs have gone down 14.7% in the last 10 years as a consequence of the energy revolution that has happened in this country, really supported by the policies of this administration. The policies that you've put forward from a regulatory perspective in particular, and your tax policies have supported this industry. And I do think this is an industry that's going to lead the way from an economic recovery perspective. But what's I think is really important for the United States natural gas industry in particular is how do we get the infrastructure online so that we can continue to support America's energy revolution. As we've seen over the course of the last few years, the activists on the other side of this industry have really been trying to stand in the way of the recovery of this industry. What they've figured out, Director Kudlow, is they can't beat us on the supply side, and they can't beat us on the demand side. The world is going to continue to demand these products. So what they do is they try to step on the hose in the middle and stop this country from building the infrastructure that it needs to continue to grow.
Before you came in?
No, sir.
Step on the hose in the middle one. Okay, just checking.
That's a great line.
Not bad.
So,
Not bad.
as we enter into a recovery phase because of this pandemic, this industry stands ready to deliver the energy that America is going to need as we build out of this crisis. But there's no question that because demand has gone down so much, that this industry is hurting. But unlike a lot of the other industries out there, this industry hasn't asked for government assistance. What we're asking for is let's get through this pandemic so that demand can come back and that we can build back the incredible energy revolution that started 10 years ago.
Let me, somewhere out there is Karen Harbert, is President and CEO of the American Gas Association. Karen, I see you.
I'm here.
Thank you,
Mr. Kudlow.
Thank you for
And
participating.
Secretary, thank you for doing this. Yes.
What's your outlook for nat gas? Nat gas is almost revolutionary. It's caused big changes with respect to the demand for other fuels and other energy sources. I reckon it's going to be around for a long, long time. We got plenty of it. On the other hand, some people on, I'll say, the other team want to end fracking and basically want to stop fossil fuels in 15 or 20 years. So how does that great industry cope with those policy trends as well as the lingering pandemic impact on the economy?
Sure. And thank you for that, Mr. Kudlow. And thank you, Secretary Brouillette, for convening this. As we speak right now, 180 million Americans are using natural gas in their homes, which of course are no longer just our homes. There are offices, our schools, our gymnasiums. And for those people that have access to that abundant resource, they're saving $880 on their utility bill every year. And with a challenging economy, $880 is real money. And that's money they can put forward to rent, groceries, pay down student debt. And so for those people that are against natural gas, they don't realize that the higher prices that some places in this country are paying is hurting the people that can least afford it. People on fixed incomes, the lower income strata. So that we're really not addressing the economy. And this industry pumps about $408 billion into the economy every year. And that's not, that's not money we're asking from the government. That's private sector money. And that's unleashing not just an energy revolution, but environmental progress. Our emissions are at 27-year lows. Methane is coming down. So for those people that are against it, they don't realize that we're not importing natural gas from all over the world from people that don't like us so much. In Boston Harbor.
As an amateur, but I've covered the beat for a long time. And of course, NEC has a lot of, as I said, energy and environmental work. I don't understand. Are we in a crisis of carbon emissions? Are we in a crisis of clean air and clean water? What's the logic? I don't understand the logic of terminating fracking or fossil fuels more generally, and particularly gas. See, I thought natural gas was relatively clean and that was the fuel source or one of them for the future, which is why it got so popular. And we have a lot of it. But I always tried, I've interviewed, believe me, 1 million people on the other team, to be fair-handed. What's their beef and what's your response to it?
Well, you're absolutely right. The increased use of natural gas has been one of the principal reasons why we've seen our emissions reduced in this country to 27-year lows. Look, we have cleaner air than they do in Europe. When you think about that, that's astonishing because they've been on their green revolution for quite some time. And yet here, we're actually making good on emissions reductions. So what I say to the other side is, if you're for the environment, then you have to be for natural gas. If you want to see a clean energy transition, it has to include natural gas because we can do it affordably and all over the country without the help of imports. And it's just quite astonishing to me that they fail to understand that we have this domestic product that is helping us to generate a healthy economy, will be essential to the economic recovery, and is essential to achieving emissions reductions that everybody wants. So it's quite puzzling when you see a Russian LNG tanker pull into Boston Harbor to deliver badly needed energy at the coldest days of the winter, that we'd prefer to do that than rather access natural gas 100 miles away.
Wow. Kathleen Skama from Western Energy Alliance, can I get you to weigh in on this discussion? We're principally doing gas here, natural gas, and I'm just trying to figure out a framework. I don't understand. I mean, I'm being very honest here. I am a kind of guy who thinks all of the above in terms of energy sources. I'm perfectly happy with renewables. Oil, gas, coal, cleaner coal, et cetera, solar. I don't have a problem with that. But I don't know what the logic is or how you might respond to it for those who want to take out all fossil fuels, and especially the natural gas one, which is, I always thought, the cleanest burning. Help us, would you please?
Well, I think you said it correctly when you talked about the other team. And, it's not about actual reduction. It's not about reality, because oil, gas, coal, we provide over 80% of the energy that Americans use every day. So, trying to replace that with an alternative is a great goal, perhaps, but in the meantime, there isn't anything that can provide that reliable energy. And when you look at the profile of natural gas, it not only reduces greenhouse gas emissions, as Karen eloquently pointed out, it's the #1 reason the United States has reduced greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country, including Europe. And we did it through market economics, not through heavy-handed government policies. But we also have contributed to the 77% decline since 1970 in traditional air pollutants. So our clean burning natural gas also provides that direct health benefit with air quality, not just greenhouse gas emissions. But when you look at the other team, I don't really think they're interested in a solution that actually works and protects the environment. I think they're interested in government control of the economy, government control of energy, and that involves a scarcity to the consumer, like the scarcity of natural gas in the dead of winter in New England, which when you hit that reality, it causes Russian imports to come in because they won't let a pipeline be built. We're seeing a situation where states like Oregon, Washington, New York are using state certification processes for the Clean Water Act to stop interstate commerce by preventing pipelines from, in our case, I represent independent producers in the Rocky Mountain West. I'm based in Denver. And we're trying to provide natural gas to Asia through the Jordan Cove LNG export terminal. We need to get that pipeline approved, but Oregon is holding up a clean water permit, not because the pipeline actually has impacts to the water that aren't mitigated in the project application, but they're using other things to say, like air quality or greenhouse gas emissions, other ideological opposition to natural gas to say, we're not going to provide you this Clean Water Act permit. And I think that type of action, if the Trump administration could help take that kind of action, that would remove states' ability to block interstate commerce, because they're preventing producers in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming from providing a product that's going to export that clean profile to the rest of the world.
So that's an interesting point. Let me come back home here, Deputy Secretary Catherine McGregor. So Catherine, as you know, we put through some important dereg measures. You got the Section 401 business that would hopefully speed interstate pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, FERC backed us on one of those regarding New York. Ha, ha, ha. I'm an ex-New York. I mean, I'm a New Yorker. Someday I'll go back. And then we had the NEPA regulation, National Environmental Policy, to hopefully speed up infrastructure, pipelines and stuff. Have they worked? Do we need to do more? And where, in your view, should we do more?
What a tee-up.
Isn't that great?
That's great.
I used to do this for a living.
I love it. Well, I have to say, President Trump, there's no doubt he has absolutely changed the game of deregulation in Washington, D.C. And I think, not to toot our horn at Interior, but we have saved taxpayers and folks, the regulated community, over $5.4 billion in our deregulatory efforts alone, and I'm not alone in all the other agencies. What you and what this president has done on NEPA is nothing short of significant. So if you think about it, when you're permitting a pipeline, like Kathleen's talking about, or going through the process of certifying Jordan Cove, there's so many different statutes you have to deal with, and there's so many levers that folks who don't want production can pull. Coastal Zone Management Act didn't come up. That's going to be one. But NEPA is a big one. And ultimately with NEPA, when you make a federal decision, you have to certify and ensure that you've considered the environmental impacts. NEPA is a 7-page law, but NEPA documents have historically been thousands of pages and taken many years. And Keystone is an excellent example. I think the process started over a decade ago.
That's correct.
And under President Trump, we finally closed that, permitted that pipeline. So what the new NEPA regs will do is focus on the areas where the most environmental impacts will be. It will ensure that agencies are sticking to timelines that make sense and page limits that had already been in the regs prior but had long been ignored.
So you think it's working?
Oh, I absolutely think that as we roll it out and as more agencies implement, it will. And I can use Interior as an example. So when we started under Secretary Bernhardt, we have a secretarial order on NEPA. On average, our NEPA EISs took over 5 years and were thousands of pages. After we put that secretarial order in place, our average is, they take about 1.1 years and they're roughly just over 150 pages. Think about that. It's a document that you could then sit down and read in a night. And it hones in on and focuses on what are the major issues that we're dealing with here and what are the impacts. We're disclosing them, evaluating them. America knows how to innovate, so we're innovating around any problems, and then we're constructing. And I know this president has been laser focused on infrastructure, and you know, when you talk about moving energy, no, energy doesn't matter. You know, no commodity matters. It's only as good as the ability to move it to the market that uses it. And I think that's going to be the big challenge. But this administration, especially, sir, under your leadership and with Francis's help, has certainly taken that on.
But Secretary Brouillette, if you get a second term, what's the agenda? You are a veteran in this business, and you're doing a heck of a good job. Governor Rick Perry was a very dear friend of mine, and he left to go home, and you stepped right in, and we've made a lot of good mischief together. But in terms of policy, so what Catherine is saying is the stuff looks like we got a good start in the first term on these executive orders and so forth.
Sure.
Where would you like to go in
Sure.
4 more years?
Sure. Well, thanks, Larry. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your kind words. Look, I think what the president has set in place, almost 4 years ago now, is working, and we're seeing the demonstrable results all across the country. And we're going to have a second panel here in just a little bit that we're going to talk about the same success all across the world. The things that we have put in place are actually working. So we're going to continue this type of approach, all of the above, as you mentioned, producing all forms of energy here in America, producing all forms of energy that, again, provide consumers with options. They provide competition in the marketplace. They provide us with energy security and national security. To build a little bit more on Katie's point, though, what we can do as regulatory agencies and as executive branch agencies is continue to build out on some of the good work around things like NEPA. I'll just give you one practical example. It sounds like common sense, and I'm not going to suggest it save the world, but it's the type of work that we as cabinet agency, as agency heads and as senior officials in these cabinet agencies need to continue to do. There was a period in time when the Department of Energy would conduct its own EIS, would conduct its own processes around NEPA, notwithstanding the fact that our colleagues at the Department of Energy had already done that work, or FERC in certain cases had already done that work.
Department of Interior.
Department of Interior,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I got it.
But and we eliminated that step. We took a very common sense step. Well, wait a minute. If the work's already been done, why would we recreate the wheel here at the Department of Energy and slow the process down on this infrastructure development by sometimes years? And it's being aggressive about clearing out that type of underbrush that I think we need to take into these agencies day in and day out. That's the approach that I've taken here at the Department of Energy. It's what I'll continue to do should there be a second term.
Let me go out looking for Mr. Duckett, Nate Duckett, Mayor of Farmington, New Mexico. So you've got what I would call a curbside seat on all this. Help us with this. Where should we go? What would your policy advice be for the future? Are these regulatory rollbacks helping? Please weigh in, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and speak on behalf of my community, which has been, whose foundations have been created by natural gas and energy extraction. We sit in the San Juan Basin, which is one of the largest basins of natural gas in the United States. Of course, with every boom, there comes a bust. And unfortunately, in the last decade, we've seen prices dramatically drop, and therefore production in our area has moved south to the Permian Basin, where they're able to pull natural gas much more cost effectively with the extraction of oil. So I absolutely agree that the rollback of regulations is key. It would be good to get some consistency and some long-term plan and not see the up and down in regards to that scenario. The concern we have here in the front page of our newspaper last week is the idea that we are surrounded by public lands. The Bureau of Land Management, we literally sit in an island surrounded by BLM and also Native American reservation here in the Navajo Nation. If they were to stop the production of natural gas extraction from public lands, that would be a huge, huge detriment to our area. For a community whose job market has already been somewhat decimated over the past decade with the loss of natural gas jobs in this area, that would just further put a stake in our heart, so to speak. So
why have you, sir, Mayor, why have you lost jobs in the last decade? I just heard that pick up on it.
Sure. Just dealing with the natural gas market, when the prices dropped, extracting that energy source from the San Juan Basin became more costly for producers like ConocoPhillips, right. Those groups who then have moved their locations elsewhere, the Permian Basin being the ideal location at this point for our area. So, we're a hardworking blue-collar community, and those individuals are going to go find where those jobs are at. They're not just going to stick around here. So we've certainly lost some population because of it.
Thank you. And can I find Mr. Ventura, Jeff Ventura, CEO of Range Resources?
Yes.
Out there someplace?
There he is.
My boss, President Trump, loves cheap energy. Just loves it. Now, we tried to get the secretary to fill up Spro a little bit when prices turned negative, but the Congress, in its wisdom, wouldn't give him a one-sentence appropriation, et cetera, et cetera. But POTUS loves cheap energy, okay? He just does. He sees it from a consumer standpoint. You know, he was a former builder in life. And therefore, I guess I want to ask you, Mr. Ventura, what do you say about cheap energy? What's the outlook for prices? And what do you need? Maybe this is the key point. What do you need for break even plus to restore profitability?
Yeah, several great questions in there. Really what happened, and it's been a good thing, is Range back in 2004 discovered the Marcellus, and then Range and others began to develop it, including the horizon below it, the Utica. From
You discovered the Marcellus?
We did. Well, we
Wow.
pioneered it.
My hat's off to you. Congratulations. I didn't know anything about that.
Well, thank you. It's some future point, I'd love to tell you the story. But
Well, I'd love to hear the story.
yeah, it's a great story and a fun story, and I was glad to be part of it. But that discovery with Range and others, and Marcellus and Utica combined, grew from basically zero in 2004 to currently about 33 billion cubic feet of gas per day. That's about 40% of the natural gas production in the United States. So at 33 billion cubic feet per day, I believe it's the largest natural gas field in the world. And it helped propel the U.S. to become, the U.S. is the largest natural gas producer in the world at this point. So what happened is supply got way ahead of demand and infrastructure. And as demands increased and natural gas usage for power generation's gone from under 10% to approaching 40%. LNG exports went from, over that time frame, from 0 to 10 Bs per day. Now we're down a little bit, but we think by year end we'll be back close to that, maybe 9 or 10 Bs, and we'll continue to grow. And it's actually with that large affordable source of resource from natural gas, and of course the natural gas liquids that come from it, it's helped attract manufacturing back to the U.S., created a lot of jobs, and importantly, back to President Trump's point, with that great demand or supply growth, the price of natural gas has dropped from 2007 till today by 63%. So the price has actually come down, which has been great for consumers, great for manufacturing. Current prices, so prices have been challenged. And to answer your question directly, you know, I think a gas price somewhere, you know, $2.75 to $3 is probably a sweet spot. If you go back to the time frame 2003 through 2007, our realized natural gas price, believe it or not, was $7. It sounds outrageous today, but that's how much prices.
Well, that was an insane period. Oil got to 150,
right.
7 months later.
And we don't need those.
Those were the good old days.
Yeah. The technology is so good now that we, you know, our break-even cost actually, when you count the natural gas liquids in it, is fairly low. You know, and a price $2.75 plus is great. It's probably a win for consumers, a win for producers.
Where is it?
There is a sweet spot in there.
In the open market, it's about $2.25.
Today,
about $2.
Yeah, and if you look at the futures price for next year, although it's been challenged for the last 6 years and it is today, if you look out into 2021 in the futures market, it's about $2.90. It's in there. So if that holds, that will help with that recovery in the V shape and help the natural gas producers get back to where we need to be.
Thank you. So I want to find Mr. Joyce, Charlie Joyce, Chairman of Otis Eastern Services. Thank you for being with us, sir. And first of all, is he right? $2.75 is a golden price to make money. And second of all, I'm going to move away from the issue of the other team. Will natural gas, because it is cheap, I mean, compared to other fuels, fossil fuels, and it's plentiful, and will it replace other fuels? Will natural gas, let's say, go out 25 years, okay? I'll probably be gone, but you'll be around. Go out 25 years. Is natural gas going to be the king and the queen of the energy business? Is it going to knock out nuclear? Is it going to knock out coal? Is it going to knock out oil? It's a very mischievous question, but I really want to hear your response to it.
My feeling is that it has to. The other things don't have the staying power. I mean, I'm not going to speak to oil or coal, but certainly the bright competitors for what people perceive to be the near future, the solar and the wind power and that type of thing. We can't produce enough energy to run our country with those sources. So we're going to have to find, we have ample natural gas, and we have to find better ways to put it to use. And then we will win that race. It's a tough deal, but I don't see anything replacing it to do that. So it's important that we do develop it.
See, this is, Mr. Secretary, this is the part I don't get. And I'm being very honest here because, again, I have nothing against renewables, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can figure out production at good prices and distribution, I think as an amateur, I think solar has probably made the most inroads in the renewable field. I'm excluding nuclear. That's a separate item. But so Mr. Joyce says you only have 10% of energy coming from renewables.
Mm-hmm.
But my friends on the other team say we can do it all through renewables. And maybe in 15 years, maybe in 25 years, it's kind of a moving target. If we're only at 10% now, how does that happen? The total replacement? I just don't get that. I don't have a vision. I don't see a pathway.
Right. Well, Larry, there's a number of technologies that are coming online that are related to things like battery technology that may at some point allow some additional integration of renewable electricity generation into our electric grid, but it doesn't exist today. And one of the little secrets that I think, a lot of folks will not acknowledge, that today, as we sit here with the lights on and everything working just perfectly and profitably, the renewable industry is completely dependent upon the provision of fossil fuel energy and nuclear energy with regard to electricity generation. They go hand in glove.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that, if you don't think that that's true, you have to look no further than what's happening in California. Just over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks,
right.
We saw a state adopt a policy that would move fossil energy out. They would say no natural gas. They've already made a decision to close their nuclear facilities, but now they're looking at the natural gas industry and they said, no, you two, we don't want you here. Our policy is going to be 100% renewables. And should we need some extra electricity, we'll buy it from Arizona, we'll buy it from Nevada, who are using natural gas and in some cases nuclear energy as well. That theory works fine for a little while. And I liken it to, my kids and their use of our cars. I have a kid who's very environmentally sensitive, and she's decided she doesn't want to buy a car. She's just going to borrow her sister's car. And that works fine until they both need it at the same time. And that's what happened in California. They needed electricity because it was pretty hot, which is not unusual in California, I might add. Death Valley is just a few miles away from Los Angeles. It gets hot there. But it was also hot in Arizona. It was also hot in Nevada. And those states chose to keep their electricity because they like their air conditioning and they wanted their lights to come on when they come home at night. So California was left out of this equation altogether. But it is fundamentally wrong at this point in time, in my view, to have a state or to have a country adopt a 100% renewable policy because
that's the thing. I got it. And again, I'm being honest here. I know this is a political season, but I don't, where's Mr. Richard Weber? You up there, sir? I don't think we've called on you, Chairman and CEO of Clean Energy. So the Secretary, why can't we integrate a vision which I would describe as all the above? I have no problem with renewables. On the other hand, I don't have any problem with fossil fuels, never had. Seems to me the technology makes them cleaner and cleaner over time. Anyway, we're talking about natural gas principally. Why can't there be some coexistence between, the Green New Deal and oil producers or gas producers?
Well, if you're asking me, it makes I cannot reconcile that. I think Jeff Ventura said it rightly that we have the largest natural gas field in the world, basically situated in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. It's an abundance of clean, very low cost energy. Any other country in the world would embrace that. Can you imagine if that was in India or China? I mean, it would be the greatest thing that ever hit them. Yet we have groups in our country that actively oppose any development within our region. You know, we produce, as Jeff pointed out, anywhere between 32 and 33 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas today, which exceeds the local markets that we are adjacent to by more than double. We have to be able to move our product around the country and also overseas. And I think that opposition groups, which I think are ideologically opposed to the concept of any fossil fuel development, have figured out the real way to really stick it to us is to oppose infrastructure development. We had a pipeline led by Duke Energy, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, that was recently terminated. Those utilities, I think, had already invested over $5 billion, possibly more, into that.
And they gave up on it. They just gave up on it for some
reason. They gave up. And we have another one, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, led by Equitrans, which I also think is at risk right now due to opposition in the courts, led by 4 or 5 very well-funded, very left-wing environmental groups, so-called environmental groups, because I think if you really cared about the environment, you would embrace natural gas, which I think one of the panelists pointed out is the single biggest reason why the United States has actually improved and lowered its greenhouse gas emissions, which makes us unique in the developed world. It makes no sense to me why this opposition is there, but what we need as an industry is we need support from the federal government to permit intelligent infrastructure development, which also includes the ability to export our product. You mentioned, Mr. Kudlow, that you see natural gas as an important element of geopolitical negotiations. I mean, look what's happening in Europe right now with this Nord Stream pipeline. We could easily be supplying that demand in Europe from reserves right here in Pennsylvania. Think about India and how India's development is taking place, where you have an agrarian society moving to a more middle-class society. It's going to need energy. We can supply that energy. Same thing with China. There's so much opportunity, but honestly, sir, we face a very organized and really well-funded opposition. And they are focusing their efforts on really retarding infrastructure development, which is quite smart on their part, and they're effective.
It's hard for me to understand. I mean, again, down through the years, I've interviewed all the leaders and listened to their arguments. It's just hard for me to understand why there's no coexistence. Did I get to Sherman Knight? Where's Mr. Knight? Did I get to him? Here you are. This is maybe an oddball question, but we've got all this good natural gas and it's relatively inexpensive. When can we get it into automobiles? Now they use it in some buses out west and Washington and so forth. When are you going to put it in cars?
Our company works on building new power plants. So I'd argue that we are, but we're doing it through electricity. I don't know the prospect of the transportation sector, but certainly we're trying to build the electricity facilities to power the electric grid. And certainly from a decarbonization perspective, electricity is a paramount.
Electric cars going to replace combustible engine?
All these questions in my mind are.
I mean, is Tesla going to be the king? They have the highest market cap right now.
I think, it's a matter of time and technology advancement. It's hard to believe over the course of the next couple of years that we're going to have electric cars take out internal combustion engines. That's crazy. And I don't know what the technology improvements in the transportation sector will be, over the course of the next 5 to 10 years.
I want to just ask, get everybody's, Mr. Steve Winberg, Assistant Secretary, Fossil Energy. So Steve, do you go to bed at night with sweaty palms and stuff? Fossil Energy. You're like, do you read the New York Times? You're not doing well, sir. You got to really pick your game up.
Actually, I go to bed with a lot of optimism because fossil energy is coal, it is oil, it is natural gas. To expand on Sherman's point on the natural gas, moving natural gas into the transportation sector, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg issue. You've got to get the refueling infrastructure before automobile manufacturers will build NGVs. But if we're going to go down the path of a net zero emission greenhouse gas emissions, which Europe is doing in some states, New York by 2050, going to be net zero, we have to address the transportation sector. We've talked a lot about the electric sector, very important, but what about transportation? Natural gas has a very real role to play there, and that's as we move into the hydrogen economy.
You know, my question about nat gas going into automobiles, it's not totally random. I mean, there are areas where transportation, bus services, for example, are using different forms of natural gas. Why not? Why couldn't that spread? We've got a lot of it.
Yep. It could, but we need to build out the refueling infrastructure. And I think, we've tried that for the last 30 years or so, hasn't worked, at least not well. In buses and taxi cabs and those sort of vehicles that are centrally refueled.
Yeah.
But I do think that the hydrogen opportunity is where natural gas is going to play a huge role, because we can produce hydrogen from natural gas with virtually zero CO2 emissions, and that will power trains, ships, local over-the-road trucks, because we're not going to do that with batteries, big construction machinery. And that's the technology that DOE is working on under Secretary Briette's leadership.
He's pretty good, isn't he?
Yes, sir.
He's a hell of a leader. Very smart guy. And he knows markets, too.
He does.
Really knows markets. In all the national security meetings, when I kept telling the spooks that the price of oil was going down, he's the only one who agreed with me. And we were right. This was pre-pandemic. Anyway, I diverge. Ms. Secretary Briette, I'm going to close it down. Thank you very much for sponsoring us, and I appreciate it.
Larry, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you all on the panel. Thank you for the conversation. If I could just sum up real quickly, at least some of the comments that I heard. I think Larry, and I think most of the people here will agree with us. For years and years and years, we had a production problem here in the United States. It was very costly to produce energy. It was very costly to find energy, very costly to extract it out of the ground. I think we've solved that problem. You know, we've done it with technologies like hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, the types of things we now almost take for granted in the marketplace. We've solved the supply problem here in America. What is challenging us, and I think what is challenging the industry, is an infrastructure problem. We need more pipelines. We need more export facilities. We have to improve our permitting processes so that we can allow this infrastructure to be built more quickly, more efficiently. You know, the product has no value without its ability to get to market, I think, as Katie pointed out earlier, and that's absolutely true. So we must work much more aggressively to get that done. And when we do, as I said earlier, we're not only creating jobs, but we're creating economic opportunities for Americans all across the country. One of the things that sticks out for me in these types of conversations is the simple fact that people are paying too much for energy. You asked a couple of questions today about prices, and the president is very focused on, you know, cheap energy, because that is good news economically for consumers. And we can figure out how to be profitable even with low prices. But what we're doing by not building out the infrastructure across the country is we're denying consumers access to that cheap energy. So, I mean, I look at the numbers, I look at the Northeast, and I see that they pay roughly 60% more for their electricity than the rest of the country because they can't get access to natural gas, as it was pointed out. I forgot, maybe it was Nate or someone pointed out, you can't build a pipeline, you know, going from the Marcellus up to the Boston region and other parts of the New England area. California, roughly 40% higher than the rest of the country. Now, you know, there's some in California who might argue that, hey, yeah, you know, we're willing to pay a little bit extra for our new technologies like solar and wind and whatnot. The challenges, as we talked about, is that you're paying 40% more and you're not even getting the product. The lights are going off. So we have to address this infrastructure problem as well as a public policy issue. So, you know, I think I probably have captured at least most of the conversation, and it's given me some direction as to what I need to do at this agency. And I know Katie, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've heard a couple things here about what perhaps we need to do together to get these regulatory processes in order and provide some certainty so that we can allow this infrastructure to move forward. But Larry, I'd just like to take just a personal moment and say thank you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You're doing great work as the director of the National Economic Council. And I know that I probably speak for everybody on the screens and in the room. We sincerely appreciate your service to the country.
My great pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good luck. Be well.
With that, we'll take a short break, and if you want to join us, we'll come back here in about 25 minutes or so, and we're going to have a new panel. We're going to talk about the international markets and what we need to do there to ensure that American energy and America remains the #1 producer of energy in the world. Thank you all for joining us. As well, Brian Sullivan from CNBC. So to my right, I don't know if you can make that out, is Katie McGregor. The Honorable Katie McGregor, I should say. Katie's a good friend of mine, and we've known each other for a long time, but she currently serves the president as the Deputy Secretary of the Interior. Steve Winberg, who is the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Fossil Energy. Steve is over to my left. Matt Zace, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs. And then our external, or the folks, we have others in the room here too, are Jeff Martin, the Chairman and CEO of Sempra Energy. Meg Gentle, who's the president and CEO of Tellurian Energy. Mike Sable, the co-CEO of Venture Global. Anatole Feigen, who is the executive vice president and chief commercial officer of Cheniere. And then we have several ambassadors with us, ambassadors to the United States from India, Japan, Poland, Mexico. And I think I saw the U.S. ambassador to Portugal, the Honorable George Glass, has joined us as well. And then we have regional media and regional stakeholders from all across the country. So thank you again for joining us. I just want to say on behalf of the president, a sincere thank you to the industry players here for making U.S. industry, making the United States the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. You've added to our economic security here in America. You've added to our energy security, certainly, and you've added to our national security as well. Around the world. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the president for doing that. With that, I will stop and I will introduce Brian Sullivan, who many of you will recognize from his work on CNBC. Brian is a longtime journalist that I learned yesterday, I think for the first time. He is also a race car driver, and we share a love of cars. And he's a two-time divisional champion as well. So he's not, he doesn't do it just as a hobby. He's a really, really good driver and has a long history there. But importantly, he understands energy markets and opines about them each and every day on CNBC. And Brian, thank you for taking time to join us. We look forward to the conversation with you and all of the panelists.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, Secretary Briette and everybody else that is here, esteemed guests and colleagues. Thank you very much, and appreciate the kind words, Mr. Secretary. I'm getting old and slow, and the crashes hurt more, so I'm pretty much semi-retired. But there was a time that I was okay. As a point of note, ironically, I just got off the OPEC press conference about 1 p.m. Eastern time. So I actually asked the Saudi minister, His Royal Highness Abdulaziz bin Salman, Mr. Secretary, if he had any questions for you. And he said that he was in touch with the White House and you and your staff frequently, and that with all due respect, he did not need an intermediary in the media. So I've got to switch my hydrocarbon thinking from oil to gas. Let's do that now. And I'll actually start with you, Mr. Secretary, which is one of the reasons I got involved in energy 10 years ago was not actually because of my love of oil or gas. It was simply because at that time in the financial crisis, it was the only industry adding jobs. I mean, hundreds of thousands of families were saved from financial disaster because of oil and gas. And I wanted to tell the American story. LNG has kind of now become that. I mean, given some of the growth properties that are out there, how important is the LNG and natural gas markets and some of the growth plans and projects out there to American economic growth and literally to just putting food on the tables of families? Mr. Secretary, I think your microphone's off.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to turn it on. My apologies. Well, Brian, I won't start completely over, but I'll just say, look, the production of energy here in America is clearly important to our economic future. It produces jobs locally. The extraction of oil and gas from, the reserves, the enormous reserves we have here in the country, is important to the regions in which it's produced, but it's also important to the regions in which it's delivered. And that's one of the important things that I think we need to talk about as well. Many, many years ago, perhaps 3, 4, 5 decades ago, supply was a problem here in the United States. The production of energy was a problem here in the United States. We simply didn't produce enough to meet the economic demands that we were seeing. And as a result, we were left to import that oil in certain cases and gas as well. When I grew up down in Louisiana, one of my earliest jobs was as a pipeline welder, and I was doing things that were, around importing facilities in the southern part of the United States. We're no longer in that position. We're now exporting. That produces, the amount of economic activity that we all like, but it produces options for consumers as well. We like to talk about what's happening here in the United States. Customers in the northeastern part of the United States pay on average roughly 60% more for their electricity than other parts of the United States. In many cases, it's because they don't have access to natural gas. They can't build a pipeline to get it from the Marcellus Shale region into the northeast area of our country. But more globally and more thinking about this from a macro standpoint, the production of energy here in America provides this president and any future president who chooses to embrace this important industry with foreign policy options that they haven't had in many, many years. And that's important for us to remember. So as we think about what happened, Brian, you just mentioned you talked to my counterpart in Saudi Arabia, and he is a good friend, and I do talk to him quite regularly. The events that happened there recently when Iran attacked one of their facilities, not that long ago would have pushed prices both, in the Brent market or in the WTI market, would have pushed them enormously high in a very short amount of time and would have cost consumers dearly. That didn't happen when we saw those events happen almost a year ago, perhaps just over a year ago. And that's because the people around this table, the people on this panel, the people that I see on the screens have changed that foreign policy dynamic enormously. So I can't overstate the importance of this particular industry. And I'll just leave it with one other point. I think roughly GDP in America, energy makes up roughly 8% of the gross domestic product here in America, the GDP. But importantly, it's the first 8% of our GDP, because everything we do here in America, everything we do around the world really depends upon the production and, importantly, the delivery of energy.
And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Secretary, which is, and we spoke about this at a CNBC interview that aired this morning, which is that there's so many projects that are, and you just approved Jordan Cove rather, in Oregon, really the first West Coast continental United States potential export facility. I think at one point there were 21 or 22 different projects around America in some sort of process, either on paper, actually being built, or ready to become operational. Do we need all of those? Do you see that, foresee that all of these projects actually occurring, especially given what's gone on in the oil and gas markets and in the capital markets?
Shorter answer is yes, because the worldwide demand for natural gas and for fossil fuels generally is going to continue to improve. It's going to continue to grow at rates that I think are going to surprise many people. We're in a bit of a downturn right now, obviously, because of the pandemic. We've turned off the economy of many countries around the world. We've seen the pricing come down as a result. We've seen production come down as a result. That's going to return very, very quickly. And as we look down the road here at the Department of Energy 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, the world is still going to be using fossil fuels and natural gas in particular. And I'm not quite sure, frankly, that we can actually meet the demand. It is that large. It is that strong. So we want to be a partner in that. We want to be a very strong economic player in that growth, in that future demand. So we're going to need all of the infrastructure that we can possibly build here in the United States, because I said earlier, I think we have largely fixed the supply problem. We know how to produce it. We just need to get it to market.
And I'll go to Deputy Secretary McGregor on this one in the Interior, because I think what's amazing about the American energy story too is that it's not just about oil and gas. And when you talk about oil and gas, some people believe it's some sort of zero-sum energy game where well, you're either on one side or the other, whether it's for climate reasons or whatever it might be. What's been amazing to me in my journey is that the states that have the greatest oil and gas output also tend to have the greatest amount of renewables, particularly on the wind side. Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, there are turbines everywhere. I think Oklahoma has more per capita. Demand growth for power because of data centers is only growing. How do you foresee LNG and natural gas working in conjunction with, alongside, or supplanting, oil and working with renewables as well?
Well, I think you see a lot of our crude oil go into products or transportation sector, whereas natural gas is predominantly, firing new power plants. And
we're getting the money. See, this is why we just need at some point to get back in person. I cannot wait to be back with everybody in a crowded convention center stuffed onto an escalator. We'll be back there someday. I know it.
oh, right. But sorry, what was your question though on renewables?
I was just saying, basically, what's amazing to me is in my journeys, literally driving across the country, the states with the highest oil and gas output actually tend to have the highest amount of renewables, whether it's solar in California or wind in Oklahoma or Texas or the Dakotas. How do you foresee LNG playing alongside the growing push for renewables?
I think our country is very diverse in our energy blessings, and we'll always use them for everything that we can for the American people. And ultimately, whether it's LNG, renewables, right now renewables power about 10% of our nation's electricity needs. Natural gas is surging up there. I mean, we still have, I think, roughly 28% of our electricity nationwide provided by coal. We want to use everything we can because at the end of the day, the end user, American families and businesses, rely on low energy prices, and that is really the key to powering other aspects of our economy.
Brian, if I could add to that really quickly, what folks don't sometimes appreciate is that today the integration of renewable technologies into our electric grid really depends upon the provision of baseload power, baseload electric generation, and that's often provided by natural gas. And I might go a step further and say, and there's folks around the table, Jeff Martin and others who are in this business, so I'll let them opine more professionally. But right now, I think it's a simple statement, and I think it's true to say that renewable energy is almost entirely dependent upon the provision of fossil fuel generation, electricity generation, or nuclear generation, but generally baseload technologies. And that's lost on a lot of people. So we can see these two live together, and we can see these things go hand in hand very, very easily.
Yeah, they all have to play a role. In fact, why don't we do that in transition right now to the aforementioned Jeff Martin, a West Point guy and a guy big in San Diego. By the way, Jeff, about nobody cares, but my dad owned a gas station in Southern California. My grandfather, who had a 6th grade education, owned a gas station in Virginia and California as well. So grew up in Encinitas, so I'm a big San Diego guy. But first off, I want you to speak to what the secretary just talked about, which is the just basic growing demand for power. Everybody wants to have their iPhone. Guess what? That's being powered by a data center, which is just eating electricity, and everybody wants to run their air conditioning 24/7 now and live in Phoenix. But before that, can you give us a quick update status on your Cameron facility? Hopefully everybody there is okay. I know it got whacked by Hurricane Laura.
Well, Brian, I appreciate the question. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Secretary Burlett for bringing the convening power of the federal government together and allowing all of us to exchange some ideas. Real quickly on Cameron, this is a 3-train LNG facility that's been recently commissioned down in Louisiana. We were quite pleased to have the President of the United States join us last year when we opened up the first train. We took a dead hit from the hurricane. Fortunately, we built the facility about 19 feet above grade. It's about 17 miles inland. Most of the damage was weather related, but we feel very good about the facility. It weathered it quite well. We expect to have it in full operations in the next 6 weeks. But I would transition to a point that you were making earlier, which I was very pleased, Brian. Earlier this year in February, the International Energy Agency came out with a report that we found quite surprising at Sempra, and that was that in 2019, global energy-related CO2 emissions in the world were flat. And as they chronicled 188 nations in the world, the #1 nation in the world that had reduced their greenhouse gas emissions the most was the United States. So if you think about the economic expansion this country's gone through under the current administration pre-COVID, they registered a 2.3% increase in GDP in 2019 against a 3% decline in greenhouse gas emissions. So 2019 actually had emissions level that were 1 gigaton below the year 2000. And in the IEA's report, it gave credit to the fact that renewables are continuing to take market share of the United States, both wind and solar, and you're seeing significant fuel switching from coal to natural gas. And I think the conclusion is that natural gas is the natural partner to renewables. And I think as you think about what that means in the United States, now, Brian, we have a case study. So if the world is serious about attacking and reducing emissions, whether it's in the transportation sector or in industry or general economic expansion, there's a roadmap. And the United States, under the leadership of Secretary Brulette and others in this administration, have put forward a wonderful case study. And I think part of the LNG discussion today is the role that we can play as a newborn leader in the oil and gas markets globally, and helping making sure that we can make America's resource available both to OECD nations and emerging markets.
That's an old school phone right there. I like that.
And it wasn't mine, by the way.
I don't know if that's a ringtone. That sounded like an actual rotary phone. Klondike 556, you're on the line. Jeff, a quick follow-up to that. Because I mentioned San Diego because you run a power company and you also produce power. What I've learned in my journey is that not all power works in all places, because for some reason we haven't gotten very good at transmitting power over long lines without significant loss of that power for the last 50 years or so. Is that the reason why we need to examine everything? You can't just have renewables everywhere because it simply is not going to work with regards to geographic and population diversity.
Well, it's a great question. I will tell you that for many of the viewers that are joining us today, Sempra Energy in its core business is a utility. So we serve more Americans, Brian, every day, their basic natural gas and electricity needs. And I think that perspective of serving customers informs how we think about both the opportunity with natural gas and with LNG. And the point that you're raising is every different part of the country has a different competitive advantage. So wind resources are quite prolific in the Midwest. Obviously, they're prolific in Texas and some of the states you mentioned. Solar is a great resource in New Mexico, Arizona, California, parts of Texas. And I think what's really missing is the ability to have a ubiquitous transmission grid. So you tend to have the different NERC regions, how we've organized our high voltage transmission. But if you had an interstate freeway like you do for transportation, for power, it would allow you to capitalize on the relative merits of each region in the country to produce natural gas-fired generation, nuclear generation, wind resources, solar, or geothermal. So I think you're on to a great point, which is there's probably an infrastructure deficit in the United States that we need to overcome to get to the maximum utilization of all of our resources in the country.
Yeah, and I'll transition to Meg and to Mike as well. Meg, I'll start with you, and then Mike, I'd like you just to go ahead and directly follow up to the same question, because you two are sort of in similar positions in the marketplace. Tell us where you guys stand with your projects. Obviously, it's been a crazy year for a lot of reasons, not just COVID, obviously from a capital markets perspective, and a lot of jobs relying on what Tellurian and what Venture Global do. Where do you stand in your output and production plans right now? Has anything changed for either of you? Meg first.
So, Brian, the project that Tellurian has is the Driftwood LNG project on the southern coast of Louisiana. It's an almost 30 million ton liquefaction plant, which means it converts natural gas into a liquid so that it can be transported overseas. We anticipate beginning construction on that facility in 2021. It is fully permitted, and a special thanks to Secretary Bruyette and also everybody at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and all the agencies that make the permitting process much more streamlined than we have experienced before, and support natural gas exports to the rest of the globe. We've had an incredible transition through the pandemic, and we saw the low in the market in June. So the LNG market is now steadily rebounding. And actually happy to see Ambassador Sandhu is here because that growth is actually led by India with over 20% year-over-year increase in LNG in India even today. So we expect to see U.S. exports get back to fuel utilization levels as we go into the winter. And it's a really exciting time, a bright spot in the energy business as oil markets stabilize and natural gas markets continue to grow.
Mike, if you could follow up.
Absolutely. I'd like to also thank Secretary Brulette for bringing everybody together. It's great to finally actually be in a room and putting on a tie, and hopefully that turns into dinner and beers in not too long as well. So we're with you, Brian. We want to see everyone at crowded conferences. Our first project is Calcasieu Pass down in Louisiana. When you looked at the weather maps and you looked at where Hurricane Laura made landfall, it actually made landfall right on our site. So we actually were the first thing to break wind on Hurricane Laura, and we came through really well. Luckily we had our walls and our gates and our pumps all in place ahead of time, ahead of this hurricane season. So we came through in pretty good shape. The people of Cameron around us, however, did not do very well, and we're working to do our part to help locally. And the local, state, and federal governments have been fantastic in supporting the region, and resources were pre-positioned and showed up quickly. So we're about a year into construction on our first 10 million ton project. We've been able to actually maintain our productivity levels and full employment of all the construction teams right through the COVID crisis. We are manufacturing a lot of equipment from suppliers around the world in addition to the US. So we actually had our main liquefaction systems are being manufactured in Italy. So we felt it first over there, but we're also in Poland with our steam generators, Belgium, France, Malaysia, Mexico, and a bit in China. So we've actually been able to maintain production levels and our schedules domestically and around the world. Energy is viewed as critical infrastructure in a lot of these markets. And so the governments did a great job, and our partners did a great job of being creative and working through it and keeping people going. We are continuing to see actually pretty good activity actually on the customer side in discussions and negotiations with long-term customers for LNG. And we think that the market, as Meg was describing, is going to turn back on shortly, and we'll start seeing more announcements for long-term contracts for US LNG.
And Anatol, you guys are a bit ahead of the game, and I've been to your Corpus facility. Obviously, you are fully functional and operational and exporting ship after ship. What have you learned along the way? If you were to sort of, advise the LNG industry, not just Cheniere, but advise the industry on things that you've learned getting to where you are with regards to whether it's global demand, global competition, global contracts, or simply the building out of a giant facility, what are some of the key lessons?
Thanks, Brian. And let me just add my thanks to Secretary Bruyette and everybody for having us. And as you heard from some of our brethren in the industry, the early days when Cheniere came up with this heretical idea of gas abundance and exports, and Meg at the time actually and others were going around the world saying, hey, there's this Henry Hub thing. It really seemed heretical only a short decade or so ago. We started operations, exported the first cargo in early 2016. Through all of these storms, through the pandemic, et cetera, have not missed a long-term customer cargo and continued to commercially and operationally innovate. And I would like to think that we've contributed to this the story of U.S. exports the flexibility, reliability, commercial viability of the solutions that the U.S. complex that Engineer brings to the table. And as we've continued to operate and source gas from, today I checked, we're buying gas from over 70 counterparties, moving it on over a dozen different pipelines. And that reliability, the flexibility of that system, as well as the construction expertise that has been honed by us and the rest of the industry, is something that is a very effective flag carrier. So lots of lessons learned. One of the main ones is to continue to stay nimble and commercially innovative. What we do today from a contractual standpoint is steps ahead of what we started out with. What we started out with, again, was then very novel, this idea of separating the commodity from the liquefaction fee and pricing it off the NYMEX contract, which we in the US and North America knew to be liquid and transparent, but was quite a difficult sales job and education, and over the ensuing decade of developing and now coming up on 5 years of operating, we've proved its mettle. So continuing to chop commercial wood as others have discussed, and continue to thank the administration, the DOE and the FERC for as Meg said, a transparent and navigable path to get these projects permitted. So we're in early innings, and I'm sure you'll hear from all of us that the future for LNG demand growth is bright, and the U.S. deserves a seat at the table as we compete with the Russians and the Qataris.
Well, we are, and I want to get to international in a moment, but Meg, I'm just going to go back to you on that because, yeah, listen, on today, I hate to bring it up, natural gas prices having their worst one-day drop since January of 2019. I don't need to tell you guys how volatile the commodity markets has been. So two things. So tell us about where the growth of LNG from a U.S. competitive standpoint is connected or disconnected from the underlying commodity price. And I'll give you a chance to slam the media. You and I have had some great conversations, but we love to focus on the day-to-day. Are we way too focused on the short-termism of this long-term market?
Natural gas is such an exciting market, and you're right, it's very, very volatile. And in fact, since the, low prices in the pandemic, we've seen U.S. gas price and Europe up over 20%, and Asian LNG prices up over 30%. So we don't stay too focused on a one-day drop, because overall the long-term market is returning. And in fact, we see demand and fundamentals of the market to actually be stronger as we're coming out of the pandemic. And as people focus on respiratory health more than ever, the prospect of being able to bring natural gas to so many of the polluted cities around the world and deliver to them, the clean air that we enjoy here is going to be such an important part of economic growth and in fact, supporting our allies. So we're not going to worry too much about the price today. We're going to see prices rising into the winter. And we're going to have challenges supplying the market over the next 5-year period, as the construction schedule for LNG is pretty well set. So we look really to the future market starting in 2024-25, and we've had some fantastic examples where LNG, being a commodity that is now much more flexible, is providing alternatives to Russian pipeline gas, not only in Europe, but also in China. And so those low prices actually provide the opportunity for the market and for the inelastic parts of the market to actually grow and to be there as part of the permanent base load part of the energy infrastructure.
Well, thanks, Meg. There's a lot to launch off there. And I want to start actually in the Indian market. So Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu, if you're there, I know you can unmute, because you're dealing with a population of more than 1.2 billion. That's, to Meg's point, is not going to need clean air. They're going to demand it, because you have a growing middle class that wants to live longer and healthier lives. But you also have a lot of fiscal, monetary, and infrastructure constraints as well. Talk to us about where LNG falls for your home country's growth and prosperity, and also what U.S. firms like the ones that are here today and others can do to help provide either capital, financing, expertise, construction, what have you.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon to all. Thank you, Secretary Dan Brouillette, for putting together this important roundtable. My Energy Minister sends his greetings to you. We are passing through unprecedented times, pandemic, economic situation. There is a lot of uncertainty the world over. However, I believe that every crisis presents itself with a new opportunity. It's never the end of the road. And I think literally and figuratively, we need energy to come out of this. On a more serious note, the US remains a critical partner for us in meeting the development aspirations of 1.3 billion people. There is no field of human endeavor where both India and the US are not cooperating. However, some of the pillars of bilateral relations have emerged crucial over the years. Energy is one such. In a short span of 2 years, it is gratifying to note that our strategic energy partnership has taken deep roots. India offers huge market. Our energy requirements would only increase as we move up the development trajectory under the visionary leadership of Prime Minister Modi, incidentally, whose birthday happens to be today. Energy security is vital to our national security. The US is abound in energy resources and leading technologies, including the natural gas. The complementarities and synergies are striking. I also believe that India-US energy partnership can energize the economic recovery in both the nations. India is now the 4th largest international market for US crude oil and the 5th largest for US LNG. Our bilateral hydrocarbons trade has touched $9.2 billion during 2019-20, marking 93% increase over 2017-18 figures. The numbers could grow in future with Indian companies entering into more long-term contracts. We welcome the entry of US LNG in the global markets as it offers us more diversity in our exports, thus augmenting our energy security. Further, US supplies have enhanced liquidity, flexibility, and transparency of global energy market. India remains focused on expediting the development of gas infrastructure across the nation, namely gas pipelines, LNG terminals, city gas distribution networks, biogas projects, etc. Investment opportunities of over $60 billion in developing gas infrastructure and associated industries have created as we strive towards a gas-based economic system in the country. We are developing a one nation, one gas grid system. The share of gas in our overall energy basket is likely to double in the next 10 years. To promote the usage of LNG in our transport sector, India is looking at developing an LNG retail ecosystem along with national and state highways in India. LNG pumps are planned to be set up along highway corridors across India for transport sector. In the last 6 years, number of CNG stations have gone up from 900 to currently 2,300. 17,000 kilometers of gas pipelines are being laid. There are a lot of opportunities for the US industry out there. Further, India has already commenced trading LNG on its first gas trading portal. With the envisaged reforms towards a free gas market, the traded volumes are expected to see an upward trend. Waste to energy is another focus area for India under the flagship program SAT-80, sustainable alternative towards affordable transport. Bio-waste is utilized and converted into compressed biogas, which is used as fuel in transport and industrial sector. The scheme is aimed at making a real impact in agriculture sector in rural India. Given the pandemic-led supply and demand distortions, the commercial contracts between LNG exporters and importers entered earlier need to be resilient and adaptive to market realities. In this regard, timely and appropriate initiatives from the US government would go a long way in restoring the confidence of Indian LNG buyers in the US projects and would help greater LNG import growth in coming years. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, thank you for that. And by the way, and happy birthday to Prime Minister Modi as well. Secretary Briette, I'll go back to you to follow up on that. Effectively, if I heard the ambassador correctly, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, he can jump in if I misquoted, is help India, help the United States, help U.S. companies help themselves. Did I paraphrase that about correct?
That's pretty close, Brian. I think that's what I heard as well. And also, Ambassador, please pass along my best regards to my counterpart. Minister Bernard has been a great friend, and we worked very close together. And also, happy birthday to the Prime Minister as well. I think, Brian, yeah, we've worked closely together. And, you know, the conversations I've had with Minister Pradhan and others when we were there earlier this year with the president, focused almost exclusively on the production of LNG here in America and how we can get it to India in a very efficient and cheap way. We want to be competitive in that marketplace because it does represent such a huge opportunity for U.S. industry. So we're working closely on that score. We're also working across the board, though. You know, one of the needs that Minister Pradhan mentioned to me was what they're looking for is metallurgical coal, so that they can increase their production of steel in India. We have many, many, many opportunities for our two countries, for these important industries to get together and do quite well.
And I want to pivot now to the European markets as well. And Mike Sable of Venture Global, I'll start with you, and then Ambassador Vilcek, if you could also follow up, because it does have to do with Poland and your region. Mike, as you guys look around the world, I mean, it's not just economic opportunity. This is political, geopolitical, strategic, obviously trying to perhaps blunt some of the impact of Russian gas coming through Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2, particularly into the German market. But it is a highly competitive European market as well, a little different than the Asian markets. Comment on your growth plans and sort of your outlook for Europe. And then Ambassador Vilcek, if you could comment on the strategic importance of U.S. LNG to really to national security of not only your country, but of the surrounding region. So Mike first, please.
Sure. No, no, absolutely. We, for our first project, Calcasieu Pass, we have actually a range of great customers in Europe. Poland, through PG&IG, is actually our largest customer between our two projects at 3.5 million tons. And we've been very proud to work with the country of Poland and the senior teams at PG&IG over many years to build that relationship. And we look forward to the first ships arriving with our LNG production. We also have customers in Portugal, in Italy, and EDF of France, and so we ended up surprisingly to have more customers, European customers, than Asian customers for Calcasieu Pass. And based on our sales activity for Plaquemines, the first 3.5 million of which were also European, we surprisingly are probably going to end up with more than half our production capacity for Plaquemines LNG, our next project, also going to Europe. So, and it's a mix of national oil and energy companies and the portfolio companies that can move their portfolios anywhere in the world, also moving them into Europe. We, as a commercial enterprise, really focus on delivering the best value to customers, which is a low risk-adjusted price for the commodity, and try to do everything we can to support that. And we definitely do target our friends and great credit quality customers, but we never go into a sales process selling against Gazprom explicitly. We just try and deliver a great risk-adjusted price. We're very happy that the U.S. is a strategic supplier to one of our best friends in Europe, Poland, and our great friends in Italy and Portugal as well.
Go ahead, Ambassador Vilcek, if you could chime in, follow up on what Mike had to say, and also the strategic importance. Natural gas has not only become a necessary source of power, but it's become a necessary source of power, if you understand my meaning there. And Poland is in a very unique position.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much, Secretary Brouillette, for inviting me to be here today and to discuss the impact that LNG trade has had on the US-Poland relations. And many thanks to all companies with whom we cooperate and who are present in this room and online today. We very much appreciate this relationship and this cooperation. Well, first, I would like to emphasize that Poland greatly appreciates America's commitment to the long-term security, energy security of Poland and the broader Central and Eastern European region. Poland is actively pursuing energy policies aimed at diversifying gas supplies. New sources of energy have the effect of bringing down prices as monopolistic suppliers such as Russia lose the power they once wielded. So a major development for Poland over the last few years has been the purchase of American LNG, a viable way, I would say, to diversify Poland's energy supplies and increase our energy security, which is essential for us. So as of today, PGNiG, which has just been mentioned, our biggest company in this business, has signed 3 major long-term contracts for supplying LNG from the United States. And thanks to these agreements, Poland will receive almost 7 BCM of American LNG annually once our contract with Gazprom expires in 2022, so very soon.
And could you put into perspective, Ambassador, just a quick follow-up for those of us that are maybe not as attuned to the math, how much 7 billion cubic meters is? What does that mean for you? And do you foresee that sort of being the end of your partnerships with Gazprom, or will you still do business with them, just not perhaps at the level you had been?
Yes, I mean, this is very essential because LNG deliveries and also the Baltic pipe, we are planning to open Baltic pipe with Norwegian gas, form the basis of the Northern Gate, as we call it, Northern Gate concept on the supply of energy to our region. So through a system of interconnectors, we seek to expand the energy systems of Central Eastern Europe, building up our region's energy security and contributing to the development of Europe's energy union. So, and what is also very important, these developments are also part of the 3 Seas initiative. The 3 Seas initiative, a project undertaken by 12 presidents of Central European countries. It's a network of 12 Central Eastern European countries that aims to improve interconnectivity in transportation, digitalization, and energy within these 12 Eastern European EU countries. So the 3 Seas initiative complements already functioning forms of regional cooperation, and one of its pillars is the development of well-integrated energy market, with gas projects playing an important role. So one of the key, if I may add something here, very important for Polish-American cooperation, one of the key takeaways from the 3 Seas Summit in Bucharest in 2018 was Secretary Perry's announcement of a new initiative called the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation. This partnership aims at catalyzing critical infrastructure elements and investments with contributions from the European Commission and the 3 Seas initiative countries. So Poland is looking forward to working with the United States and to use this platform, this PTEC platform, to promote clean fossil energy technology as an indispensable element of energy transition, as well as to facilitate access to new sources of natural gas through new routes. So this is, we are a part of the region, and we are trying to improve interconnectivity also, and first of all, on the gas market.
Well, I want to go to U.S. Ambassador to Portugal, George Glass. Ambassador Glass, thank you very much for joining us, because you've talked about the challenges of infrastructure issues and everything that we want to do and all the nice words that we're using today. And that's great. It's nice to see this kind of geopolitical cooperation isn't going to mean a thing if we can't get something built. You're there, you're in Portugal, by the way, but you're sort of on the edge, literally seeing what comes from the United States to mainland Europe. What are the biggest challenges to getting real, meaningful energy infrastructure projects accomplished in Europe?
Brian, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. It's a little bit of a complicated answer. But first, before I begin, I want to say that under the leadership of Secretary Barrett, we've had a tremendous amount of success, and I think the LNG business is only moving forwards and will be seeing greater growth in the future. As Anatol was talking about sending off a ship to Europe 4 years ago in 2016, you know, as he broke the champagne on the side of the ship and pushed it out into the ocean, it came to Portugal, and it came to the port of Sines, which is about 100 miles south of Lisbon, and it's the closest deep water port to the United States. So it's very important for the shipping lines, and especially for natural gas. And to give you an idea of the importance of what that represents now, US LNG is roughly 25% of Portugal's consumption for natural gas. So it's taken hold, it's very important here. And it also is very integral in the president's, the focus on energy security in Europe. And as you talk about building things and putting together infrastructure, we've got some of that here, but one of the most important things, and it's really what you look at versus Nord Stream 2 and what the Russians are doing, we have an opportunity with a pipeline that currently exists called the Mid-Catalonia pipeline, the MidCat pipeline. It begins at Sines and it goes to northern Spain right now. And with a very short interconnect across the Pyrenees into France, about 150 miles, we can begin pumping US LNG directly into the heart of Central Europe. So when you talk about the build out of infrastructure and how important that could be for Europeans' energy security, I look at the MidCat pipeline as a key piece of that. And it's a key piece of what this administration's pushing here. So I just, you know, the importance of liquefied natural gas is seen here in Portugal. And as you're talking about, you know, how it revolves around and is evolved with the renewable energy field, you know, Portugal's a leader in that. Portugal actually ran their entire country for 4 days off renewable energy. It's the current record at this point in time. And, you know, with 25%, they're looking at not only natural gas, but US LNG as being an important component to augment that for decades to come. So,
well, Ambassador, let me jump in for a second, because I'm sitting in New Jersey, and I know that New Jersey and New York, that we can't get a train tunnel built because they can't agree on something that benefits both parties, both states. I got to imagine it's even more difficult to sort of convince Portuguese, Spanish, and now French authorities that this is, then you got the EU Parliament chiming in. You mentioned, it sounds good. Let's pump US LNG into the heart of France, the heart of Europe, but it's obviously not done. What's the biggest problem? Is it literally just bureaucracy, or is it capital? What?
Well, there's always politics involved too. You know, you have France wanting to protect its nuclear programs and so forth, and there's various other issues that go with, you know, Spain's got a number of regasification plants they'd like used also to be able to feed into that pipeline. But all three countries agree that something needs to be done. And as they focus on going to carbon neutrality by 2050, all of a sudden natural gas becomes exceptionally important, and you can't be dependent on something like Russia in Nord Stream 2 to be able to be consistent partners in that. And so, you know, one of the other items that both Portugal and Spain are looking at is, along with this pipeline, would be hydrogen, you know, which is clearly where everybody in Europe and around the world is focused on for clean energy. So if we can be able to produce and pump hydrogen along with natural gas in the MidCat pipeline, I think France, everybody would agree that that's working in the right direction.
Yeah, we're just kind of working our way around the world here. And I want to go a little closer to home and go back to Jeffrey Martin. And then I believe we have Mexico's Deputy Chief of Mission, Alfredo Miranda, as well. And, you know, we're talking about putting things on ships and going 3,000 miles across the sea, or in Japan's case, we'll get to Japan in a moment, 6,000 miles across the Pacific. But what about a lot closer to home, Jeffrey? Obviously, the Mexico-United States energy relationship, it is necessary for both. It is vital. It is long-standing. It has been reworked by the USMCA, but it's also sometimes can be contentious as well. Where do we stand with the Mexico deal? Obviously, Sempra's business in Mexico, and then I'd love to have the Mexican representative, Mr. Miranda, chime in as well on what U.S. LNG and gas means for his nation.
Thank you, Brian. We've called a little bit of an audible and upgraded. We now have Ambassador Martha Bersana with us today, and I want to extend a warm welcome to her.
We'll upgrade the anchor as well. I'm going to leave and bring in somebody. Sorry, I did not know. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm here to help you, Brian.
Thank you.
I had the good fortune of joining Ambassador Bersana, President Lopez Obrador, and President Trump for a dinner here. And it was a wonderful summit here in Washington, D.C. And I think there were two takeaways from our time together. Number one is there is a clear mutual interest that's been identified to see the further continued integration of both economies. And secondly, there was a clear warmth in that relationship between the presidents of both countries, which I think really bodes well for the future. But as Sempra Energy thinks about Mexico, think about a market where you have 130 million consumers. Together with the United States and Canada, there's just over 500 million people. It's probably one of the most resource-rich regions in the world. So you're talking about oil and gas reserves that are 3 or 4 times larger than the Middle East. And I think the opportunity to collaborate and help both countries be successful is a real opportunity. And at our company, we've invested over $10 billion in Mexico since 1997. We're the largest foreign energy investor in the country. And what we've tried to focus on is making sure that this is not a competition between the private market and the state-owned enterprises. In fact, we actually think there's a very vibrant role for Pemex and CFE. And part of what we try to do as a company is make sure that every time we make an investment in the country, it's with a view toward raising the standard of living for all Mexicans. And we view that partnership role as a very much a cornerstone for Sempra. As an example, there are currently 17 high-pressure transmission lines between the United States and Mexico. Sempra owns 11 of those. And we move about 8 billion cubic feet of gas per day from the United States into Mexico. And at various times during this year, that's been more trade with Mexico than all of the LNG trade that the United States has with the world. So roughly the LNG trade for America is roughly between 8 and 10 BCF per day. So we think it's a really good opportunity. And what's taken place is, and many people have talked about it on this call, but it's an opportunity for Mexico to diversify its energy supplies, lower prices on the average Mexican family and Mexican businesses. And it's also an opportunity at their choice to displace fuel oil and power production. And that's a real opportunity as we go back to the IEA study that I talked about. American natural gas is playing an important role in how that country moves forward. And I would conclude with one comment. Pre-COVID, Mexico had a gross domestic product that ranked number 15 in the world. And by our estimates, we expect it to be number 7 in the world by 2040. So I think the opportunity for economic expansion in Mexico and for a rising tide to lift the standard of living for all Mexicans is there. And we think this continued integration between American surplus and oil and natural gas inures to the benefit of Mexico. And we're very pleased to be part of that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I think I will have very little to add, just to underline that with USMCA now in place, we really have a region that it's outstanding in two areas in which it can be totally self-sufficient. One is energy, and the second is food security. And this is something that it's really not very common. What I would say is that the importance of the presence of Sempra y Enova in Mexico and now the projects that they have is that it will be transforming the gas markets from regional markets to most global markets, because it will be maybe a plant in Mexican territory for export to Asia, which is something that it's really a game-changing situation. I would like to underline that Mexico is now the #1 export market for natural gas and refined products for the US. So Jeff said make some reference to very specific data. And Canada, it's the top destination for crude oil. So it's a very integrated region in energy. But also we could even work more for what is the future, which is the availability to cheap electricity, also with the transformation of the auto industry in North America, that we will need cheap electricity. And we can be very much integrated, not only in the area of gas, but with wind, solar, geothermal, which Mexico has large fields very near the US border. And of course, it's the use of LNG and natural gas in Mexico. It's extremely important also, so that Mexico is able to comply with the commitments that we have agreed under the Paris Agreement on the climate change agreement. So we appreciate very much the presence of SEMPRA in Mexico. We think that we have to work together for a stronger energy security in the North American region, which is really outstanding. And that from the 2 LNG plants that we have in Mexico now, but we don't liquefy the gas, we on the contrary, we receive it. So we are changing also and now to do another aspect. And I would like to underline also another area in which we have to be cooperating together, which is the supply of electricity and LNG to Central America, because we have to incorporate Central America to the development train of the North American region.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to go to a representative from Japan, Tamaki Sukada. Thank you very much for joining us. Your country is in an interesting spot because you are, I believe, the third biggest taker of US LNG in the world. You have been pressured to transition off of coal. Obviously, you're heavily nuclear powered as well, but LNG is a growing part. I think in September of 2019, the days are dragging on, you'll forgive me. Your country announced a $10 billion investment in LNG infrastructure. What does US LNG mean for Japan's future? What type of a role do you see it playing? And then I would like Anatol of Cheniere to jump in as well, because you were some of the first to ship LNG to Japan. So Mr. Sukada, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And before I start, I first of all want to thank Secretary Brouillette for calling this conference. Ambassador Sugiyama wants to send his respects to you. Unfortunately, he is on a business trip today, this week. So I was asked to fill in his place. In fact, I just arrived in the US last week. So I'm now under this voluntary quarantine, and much that I would love to have participated in person, I will have to speak remotely. But anyway, thank you for having me on this conference. Here, first I would like to start by explaining the significance, value of LNG import from US. Obviously, importing LNG from US is first and foremost reliable. US is Japan's only treaty-bound alliance partner, and it is also beneficial in the context of our supply procurement diversification strategy and energy security. So altogether, it is very significant and valuable. And obviously, increased US LNG export is beneficial for the wider Indo-Pacific region too. And I think the ambassador of India has very eloquently explained the significance of the future development of the Indo-Pacific LNG market. And Japan is in fact the world's largest LNG importer. And we have a lot to offer in terms of building the necessary infrastructure in the form of providing finance and also know-hows, and also providing depth to the development of a functioning, free and open LNG market in the Indo-Pacific region. And in this respect, I think Japan and US, we have a common interest in pursuing these objectives. And also Secretary Brouillette mentioned about the LNG providing a foreign policy option, and I cannot agree more on this. We think that LNG opens up regional cooperation galore, which will in turn help strengthen the stability and the reliability of the market. And here I just wanted to add one point. which is how we see the future, how we take this forward. In fact, Japanese companies have long-term procurement contracts with 3 major US LNG export facilities, Cove Point, Cameron, and Freeport. And we think there will be stable flow of LNG import from US on a long-term basis. Having said that, our demand is pretty much covered already by these existing long-term contracts with the US and other suppliers. So frankly speaking, we do not think that there will be a huge demand growth domestically, but we do, however, see a huge demand growth in the rest of the Asia. And this will be driven both by the economic needs and also for climate, environmental reasons. The question here is, I wouldn't say this is a risk, but rather a constraint unless properly addressed, which is the infrastructure bottleneck that we need to cater to the growing demand. And if infrastructure can be a potential snag to a healthy growth in the Asian LNG market. And another strategic consideration is how we cope with the big player in Asia. And I think everybody understands which country I am talking about, who will be competing with us in terms of finance and resources. And we are also concerned about their behavior in the maritime security area. This is posing a big challenge to the neighboring countries, including Japan. So like-minded democratic countries will have to get our acts together to make sure that there is conducive environment for an open and free market, not an exclusive or segmented and closed market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you very much. I will look forward to. I used to work for Mitsubishi Bank, so I remember a small amount. Yeah, and we'll look forward to you getting out of quarantine, and we all can meet at some point sometime soon. Anatol, follow up with that, and then I'll give Secretary Briette the final comments. I know we are running out of time. Obviously, Japan, like other nations, pushing for climate change, and especially with India and everybody else. I mean, Japan's a little ahead of the game. What role is LNG and Cheniere going to play in all of the world's goals of powering the population, but doing it as responsibly as humanly possible?
Thanks, Brian. And I have the honor and privilege of representing a company that has exported to all of the countries that are represented. But as was just listed, I do not have the pleasure of having a long-term supply contract with Japan. So hopefully that's...
Didn't sound like one's coming, Anatol. He basically said we're full.
Well, exactly. But to your point, and I'm going to ride the coattails of Mike's brilliant redirect on the geopolitical question, and just say that the attributes and the benefits of LNG and destination-free, flexible and reliable US LNG have been mentioned a number of times. We think that will continue. Jeff mentioned the roughly 1 billion tons of reduced CO2 emissions that have played out here since I believe the peak in 2007, as US GDP has doubled in that same period. And we see US LNG exports as having a very important seat at that table, the table that displaces more polluting fuels. And that is something that we have had the benefit of in North America. Mexico actually is our second largest export destination for Cheniere's US LNG. And we think that is an absolutely critical component in combination with the economic benefits and the flexibility that we bring to the table. So the work that the DOE and the NATL have done on life cycle emissions of US LNG forms a large portion of our analysis. We contribute to that ourselves and believe that for decades to come, as the world figures out how to optimally balance its energy needs, LNG and in particular US LNG will be a contributor to economically and environmentally efficient solutions.
Well, I would say, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sukata, it's kuon or ganbate, which is like good luck or do your best or something like that, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Thank you, to get into the Japanese market. Let's wrap it up with this. We've learned a lot in this hour or so, Secretary Briette. I want to wrap it up with you. I think we've learned a couple of things. Number one, there are 15 different pronunciations for your last name. Number two is that it appears that infrastructure issues are the main thing for all the countries you've heard from, whether it's Portugal or India or the European market or Japan, that infrastructure is going to be key. What role does the U.S., you know, these are sovereign nations, but at the same time, we have capital and expertise. What role will we play in that build out, if any?
Oops, Mr. Secretary, I think your mic is on.
Sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. I keep forgetting to push this button, but thank you, Brian, for taking time. I can think of no better moderator for this panel, and you've just done a wonderful job. Thank you for your interest in this area. Thank you for your participation today. Thanks for joining us. And with regard to my last name, I never hold it against anyone. I think I was in the 8th grade before I learned how to spell it, so it doesn't bother me when people pronounce it incorrectly. But, you know, I think if I could sum it up, I've heard a lot of different comments here, but I think infrastructure tends to be the common denominator for all of the countries, all of the markets, and I know it is here in the United States. As I mentioned to a group earlier today, we figured out the equation on how to produce energy here in America. What we need to do is to figure out the equation on infrastructure, how to get pipeline development here in the United States. Importantly, for these companies, for the countries that might want to purchase our product, how to get export facilities built here in the United States. And we need to do that quickly. What I also heard is that there is a growing demand for LNG all around the world. And I'll just give you one quick statistic that's coming out of our Energy Information Administration here, part of the Department of Energy. LNG exports from the United States are expected to reach an all-time high this year at the end of 2020. And that's enough this year to meet nearly 1/5 of the current global LNG demand. That's an amazing statistic. It's very important for us, though, as the U.S. government, and with our partners all around the world, that we focus on the ability to get that product to market. So with that, I will stop. Thank you all for taking time to join us today. Thank you for your participation in this event. More importantly, thank you for what you do all around the world, creating jobs, creating security, creating economic security. Thank you for all of that. And Brian, again, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr.
Secretary. Thank you, Brian.
You all.